I am something of an amateur geography enthusiast. As a touring musician, I have the pleasure of getting to see a lot of our beautiful country. Most of it looks like this, or this, and mostly this. But all states have something that makes them unique. Every new place I go, I'm compelled to do some research on. I love studying the history of these different states, and every time I go back, I try to find out something new, whether it's looking further into their food culture, industry, or unique topography. Something I never considered until recently was finding out every state's greatest baseball player. So for this video, I decided to set out and discover who reigns as the supreme ball player over each state. Some are stacked, some not so much. Whether you're curious about your own state's best player, or if you're taking a trip somewhere new and want to impress the locals with your ball knowledge, join me on my quest to find the best player from each state. A few notes. 1. I'm determining this based purely on Baseball Reference wins above replacement. Is WAR, more specifically Baseball Reference's version of WAR, an imperfect measure of value? Yes. But I ask you, what the hell else am I going to use? At the scale we're implementing it, the margin for error doesn't really equate to that much of a difference. 2. I'm doing only the best position player. I felt this gave me a broader array of guys and areas to cover. So if you want to see the best pitcher from every state, please like this video if you feel it earns one, so I know that you enjoyed going on this journey and would like to do so again. I'm also doing based on where they were born and not where they grew up. As you'll find out, a lot of these players moved out of state at a young age. If that's the case, they'll still be the main focal point, but I'll do my best to highlight some of the other players who actually called the state their home. Last note, music fans, stick around to the very end of the video for a special announcement. Before we start, a word from our sponsor. Alright, look y'all, I have a confession to make. I love food, but food and I have had a bit of a shaky relationship in the past. Sometimes I don't have enough time for it, and often it feels like I have to make a choice between my meals not tasting all that good or them not being all that good for me. But with today's sponsor Factor, all of those issues are a thing of the past. Factor takes the stress out of meal planning by letting me skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, I get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to my door, and with over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan plus veggie, I never find myself running out of fresh and new options. Factor meals benefit me especially when I'm in crunch time and need a meal that is healthy, convenient, and filling. A combination that is surprisingly hard to find. Many of you have Q4 crunch coming up, and I know from personal experience how difficult it was to find a healthy meal during this stretch. Factor is also flexible. You can change your order up every week with plans that range from 4 to 18 meals, and you can pause or reschedule your deliveries every week. So if you want to both support this channel while also supporting your wallet, you can use code NMFNOV50 at checkout to get 50% off your first Factor box and free shipping. Or you can just follow the link in the description, pin comment, and what do we have here? Is that the famous QR code I keep hearing about? So that is code NMFNOV50. Again, you'd be directly supporting this channel while getting an amazing deal. Really is a win-win situation any way you slice it. Thank you again to Factor for sponsoring this video. Now, let's go on a road trip unlike any you've been on before. Willie Mays is the greatest player from the state of Alabama to top off a stacked class. He's looking down on 6 other Hall of Famers and Willie Wilson. Mays himself was born in Westfield, a portion of Fairfield which was owned by Tennessee Coal and Iron Company before being purchased by U.S. Steel. So yes, Willie Mays is from one of America's last true company towns and personally dealt with all the baggage associated with them. One notable development of these latter-day company towns such as Westfield was the prominence of amateur baseball organized by the companies as a means to keep their employees happy, build loyalty, but most importantly, in order to minimize the threat of a workers' union. This eventually led to the creation of industrial leagues. His father, Kat, played in these leagues and even let young Willie sit on the bench during some of his exhibitions, which heavily fostered his interest. So yes, company paranoia over unions indirectly led to one of the best baseball careers of all time. And to that I say, God bless the USA. Going directly from the third best player on this list to the worst, we have Josh Phelps. Josh Phelps was born in Alaska's biggest city, Anchorage, but grew up in Idaho, so this inclusion is one of the more misleading ones. Even Josh doesn't consider himself an Alaskan. He's a very shrewd individual, and was originally going to pursue a career in engineering before the Blue Jays took an interest in him out of high school. Drafted originally as a catcher, he became just the third non-Hall of Famer to hit multiple homers off of Roger Clemens in a single game on August 29, 2002. The other two? Manny Ramirez and Albert Bell. Eventually, they welcomed their final member Damian Rolls in 2003. Josh himself had a promising career, posting a .925 OPS in his rookie season, which for all you common OPS Plus enjoyers out there, was good enough for a .138 OPS Plus. Boy, the steroid era was nuts, but lack of playing time caused by not having a set position led Phelps to be waiver wire fodder, bouncing between the Blue Jays, Indians, Devil Rays, Orioles, Yankees, Pirates, and eventually Cardinals organization from 2004 up until his final major league game in 2008. What's perplexing to me is that he showed flashes of greatness. He put up a .463 on base percentage over 58 games as a pinch hitting specialist for the Pirates in 2007. The following is a list of players you may know who were never able to do that in a similar span of games. He was a bright young individual who had good command over the strike zone, and I truly believe he could have been a better representation of Alaska if only he could have learned how to play first base. Ian Kinsler is the best player from Arizona, which is somewhat of a surprise to me. In my head, it was always Dustin Pedroia. But one, Pedroia only went to school in Arizona, and even then, Kinsler still edges him out in career R-WAR. Ian was born in Tucson. Many of us remember Tucson for the horrific shooting that nearly took the life of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords on January 8, 2011. But that's kinda dark, so let's replace that association with something else. Did you know it is also the primary filming location for the movie Major League? Or that the first official skate park was opened in Tucson? Or that it was the capture site of famed bank robber John Dillinger? Guess he didn't have a great escape plan that day. Kinsler himself is a prime better than you remember candidate, on the basis that he did everything well while sneakily being one of the best defensive second basemen in his prime according to the metrics that were available, or according to your uncle because he made the plays he needed to make, even if the hardware didn't start rolling in until his mid-30s. He could have actually been a hometown hero as the Diamondbacks drafted him twice, first out of high school in the 29th round of the 2000 draft, but Kinsler felt he was better than a 29th round draft pick, so he committed to Central Arizona, where he was chosen in the 26th round a year later by, of course, the Arizona Diamondbacks, who were still the only team scouting him. Kinsler, who really felt his pure talent and feel for the game would attract scouts in bucketfuls, transferred to Arizona State, where he became teammates with Pedroia, who ate away at his playing time. So as a result, he transferred to the University of Missouri, where his draft stock finally rose, up to the 17th round by the Texas Rangers. At this point, Kinsler had no choice but to sign. He is considered to be one of the greatest 17th round draft picks of all time, only bested by Kenny Lofton, who was drafted out of UVA, located in Kinsler's Tucson, Arizona, just in case you need something else to remember Tucson by. Brooks Robinson barely edges out Archie Vaughn for the greatest player out of Arkansas. He was born in the state's capital, and if we're being honest, the only city people not from the state recognize the name of, Little Rock. Young Brooks worked for the Arkansas Gazette as a paperboy, considered to be a fairly progressive publication considering time and location. Robinson's high school, Little Rock Central High, would become a focal point for the civil rights movement in 1957 when their principal denied entry to 9 black students despite it being deemed unconstitutional per the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision. This led President Dwight D. Eisenhower to send members of the U.S. Army in order for them to be allowed safe entry into the school. I've always wondered what the lessons were during this debacle. Like, they didn't close the school down or anything, so just imagine being in geometry learning about the Pythagorean theorem, only to look out the window and see the US military standing guard. Robinson had graduated by the time this historic event occurred at his alma mater, but you have to assume it affected him somewhat. I mean, he graduated only 2 years prior. You'd think the school's state champion winning quarterback still had a few friends there. His Orioles did not play the days the events were unfolding, but he went 4 for 4 with a triple the day after, which helped him end the season on an 8 for 15 tear. He's also considered to be the best defensive third baseman of all time, nicknamed the Human Vacuum Cleaner, and is only one of 4 Hall of Famers who debuted after integration to have an OPS plus at or below 105, which is not a complaint at all. As a defense enjoyer myself, I am giddy when it's given proper respect. Barry Bonds. I mean, just Barry Bonds. The greatest hitter of all time. I gotta be honest, I kinda hate writing about him because I feel so much ink has been spilled already. There's not really much more to add to his story, so just some general observations viewing him through the lens of where he was born. First, I never realized how young Bobby Bonds was when Barry was born. 18 years old. I can't help but think about the fact that the Bondses could have had their own Griffey moment had Bobby been able to play well into his 40s. If only there was a substance that could help athletes heal and recover between games faster despite their advanced aging. Oh well. While Barry was born in Riverside, he grew up in San Carlos while his dad played in nearby San Francisco. I never really associate Bonds as being the hometown kid for the San Francisco Giants, the same way I do for guys like Joe Mauer and the Twins, or Michael Harris II and the Braves, even though his extended family is Giants royalty. It's probably because, for starters, he had the chance to play for them during his entire career, but turned down an offer out of high school because it was $5,000 less than what he was willing to accept. Or just maybe, every other controversy he was involved with overshadowing his hometown pride. The Giants did retire his number in 2018, and the franchise has welcomed him with open arms after it seemed like they turned their back on him, as did the rest of MLB in the late 2000s. Whew. I just talked about Barry Bonds without directly mentioning the steroids, home run records, 500-500 club, 2004, being a dick, or being a playoff choker. But if you are unfamiliar with anything I mentioned, there is a whole host of articles, videos, documentaries, pages, podcasts dedicated to covering his career in all of its glory. Intuitively, you would think the state of Colorado would produce a better hitter. No offense to Chase Headley, but think of the guys that came through and succeeded in the Rockies system. Maybe it works inverse, where a strong kid with holes in his game hits a few tanks for his Erie Tigers and suddenly thinks he's Todd Helton before getting humbled in a Florida instructional league. Speaking of Todd Helton, Headley transferred to the University of Tennessee as a sophomore. Insane reach here, but you have to wonder if idolizing the Rockies hero had anything to do with his decision to attend his former school. Headley himself was born in Fountain, a town known primarily for an explosion that occurred when a freight train carrying explosives collided with a passenger train in 1888. This event was known to locals as the Blast. Headley himself blasted 130 homers from 2007 to 2018. He actually played in the infamous Game 163 between his Padres and his hometown Rockies, even collecting the final hit for the Padres in that game, which forced Clint Hurdle to bring in his 10th pitcher, Ramon Ortiz, to get out of the inning. Headley would go on to have one of those solid, better than you remember, because, hey, it's kinda hard to keep track of every player who had a good careers. But he currently holds the title as the best position player from the state of Colorado, and with David Bodie and his 4.4 wins above replacement as the next closest active player, that title should be safe for quite some time. And now we arrive at one of my favorite parts of doing this video, researching old fuckers. The best player from Connecticut died during the Great Depression. You would think that a state that's essentially the suburb of New York City would draw more youth involvement in baseball in the past century. Only 22 position players from Connecticut have played in the majors since 2000. But Mark Vientos is one of them, and according to Mets fans in my comment section, he's the best player of all time. But he has a long way to go in order to top the old Jolly Roger. Roger Connor himself was a switch hitter. Not only was he a switch hitter, you could argue he was the greatest switch hitter of all time until some guy from Oklahoma came along and used his farm boy power to lay waste to baseball throughout the 1950s. We'll get to him later. So if you really want to impress your friends during daily sit around and name dudes hour, be sure to bring up Roger Connor when the topic of switch hitters comes around. He was also the all-time home run leader heading into the 20th century, even if he didn't know it at the time of his death. Always remember to thank your local stat keeper. It's also said that Roger Connor and his teammates' gargantuan sizes inspired his New York team to adopt the nickname of the Giants, which, as you've surmised, is still the team's name to this day. Unfortunately, just like every baseball story during the time, it was probably fabricated. Yes, the most exciting of states and the most exciting of players. Paul Goldschmidt hails from Delaware's most populous city, Wilmington. A city so notorious that it isn't even the first result when you try and Google its name. And a player so exciting that many of you watching forgot that he won the MVP not even 2 seasons ago. Obviously this is all sarcasm, but I want to dispel the myths that Delaware is a boring state and that Paul Goldschmidt is a boring player. Now, my expertise is in the latter, so that's where I'll start. We all like home runs, we all like stolen bases, and we all enjoy it when our favorite players put the ball into play. So what if I told you Paul Goldschmidt is the only infielder in MLB history to have 300 homers, 100 stolen bases, and a strikeout rate under 23%? Pretty freaking cool. He's also one of only 17 first basemen to post an 8-WAR season, the first being, of course, Roger Connor. Okay, now on to Delaware. Fight Club. Fight Club takes place in Delaware. Chipper Jones is the embodiment of Florida. Before we get into it, let's pay respects to some of his brethren who fell short. Whether that be Mr. Vial of Miami Sugar himself, Tim Raines, the cigar-smoking, bat-wagging Gary Sheffield, or former U.S. Senate candidate Steve Garvey. In honor of Chipper in Florida, let's go over some moments that did his homeland proud. March 1997. Chipper Jones began an affair with a Hooters waitress he met in Florida during spring training, which eventually led to him impregnating her a few months later. 2004. Chipper took the naming of his own child as an opportunity to troll Mets fans when he chose the name Shea because of how well he hit at their home ballpark, Shea Stadium. I'm talking, of course, the kind of hitting you do with a bat. I don't know about the other kind. Kind of a good name if you ask me. Hell of a lot better than if he waited a few years to name his kid's city. June 2013. Chipper got into some hot water for sending a tweet pondering if the solution to illegal immigration was to take the alligators from Florida and Louisiana and dump them into the Rio Grande. Which, honestly, with the rhetoric we heard during this election cycle, I wouldn't be surprised if our policymakers start hitting him up about implementing the Gator solution. January 2014. Jones rescued teammate Freddie Freeman during the infamous Atlanta snowpocalypse. You know, the one that shut the city down for a week and led to the last memorable bit Saturday Night Live ever did.
And I'm willing to admit I may have overreacted. For example, when the storm started, I preemptively shot my neighbor lest he raid my Costco stash. Yeah.
Now what do I mean by rescue? Well, basically the highway was gridlocked because we ATLians, we don't drive in the snow, alright? We're just not built for it. Freddie happened to be stuck in this gridlock, and when he texted his teammate Chipper about it, received a text in response asking where he was, and the next thing he knew, Chipper was decked in full camo on an ATV that was also decked in camo, ready to pick him up and drive him to safety. Just goes to show that you can take the man out of Florida, but you can't take the Florida out of the man. My home state of Georgia's best player is Ty Cobb. Now, we could spend an eternity going over the complexities of the Georgia Peach, but one story that many of you may not know is that Ty Cobb's father was tragically murdered by his wife Amanda when Ty was 18 years old. His mother was arrested but claimed that she shot in self-defense, believing Ty's dad to be an intruder. I mean, that is some dark shit, dude. I really don't know how anyone can live with that fact, let alone put up one of the best baseball careers in the aftermath. Cobb himself stated that he never really got over it. On the upshot, at least he never took that pent-up aggression with him on the field. Shane Victorino, or the Flying Hawaiian, is the best player from, you guessed it, Hawaii. I really do need to start a counter for how many of these players are nicknamed directly after their state or town. Off the top of my head, it's just 2 with Shane and Cobb. Alright, mispronunciation speed round. Victorino was born and grew up in Wailuku. He attended high school only 3 miles away from the site of the 1790 Battle of Kapenawai, considered to be the bloodiest battle ever fought on the islands, in which Kamehameha's army attempted to breach the island of Maui, but were ultimately unsuccessful. It was said that the waters of the Iao stream were essentially dammed by the amount of dead bodies. Oh yeah, this is a baseball video, isn't it? Yeah, so Shane Victorino was a good player. He served as a dynamic piece for the Phillies during their 2008 to 2011 run. The Red Sox signed him to a pretty fair 3-year, $39 million contract, and he immediately put up a career-best 6 wins above replacement in 122 games on their way to a Miracle World Series run. I love this detail on the ESPN report. He was on a snorkeling trip when the deal was announced. That is so Hawaii-coded. Idaho is an interesting state. Its settlers were essentially the ones who were able to brave the plains of the Midwest while on the Oregon Trail, but couldn't quite get past the Rockies. Strong, resilient people, but never quite got the credit they deserved. Several trading posts throughout the state were set up along the trail, one of which by Francois Payette, who became the namesake for the town that raised Idaho's greatest player, Harmon Killebrew. Killebrew was a transcendent player for his time. Only Hank Aaron, Frank Robinson, and Willie Mays had more extra base hits during the 60s, and out of those guys, only the Frankster had a higher OBP. Harmon Killebrew also proves how full of shit we were in understanding the game. Here are the top 10 home run hitters until 1981. These are all the ones who didn't get elected on their first ballot, not the ones who didn't get in second time around, and third time. Finally, he got in on his 4th try, but why did it take the killer 3 more post-retirement trips around the sun to get in? It's because his batting average was low. That was it. He struck out a lot too, I guess, but imagine thinking the 5th greatest home run hitter at the time was not a Hall of Famer because he barely reached 2,000 hits, or because his career batting average didn't start with a 3. That's like thinking fellow Twins great Jim Thome isn't a Hall of Famer. He had the 17th lowest post-integration BABIP, by the way, and nobody in his area code, save for Dave Kingman and Mark McGwire, came even close to his isolated slugging, which is just about the best number they had at the time, to show how much of his prowess was chalked up to getting good wood on the ball, which is kind of the success coefficient for hitters. All I know is that for a state known for its quiet strength, it's only fitting that its best player's greatest tool was his quiet strength. What's so fun about this video and concept is that 1 second I'm talking about historical giants such as Kamehameha, who many of you probably figured out is the namesake of the famous Dragon Ball Z attack sound, you know, the The next second I'm talking about Rickey Henderson, and in my own headcanon they're on equal power levels. Not only is he the most prolific base stealer of all time, he's one of the most prolific personalities this game has to offer. Rickey Henderson is part of the universal force that creates lifetime fans even if their team is losing 90 games a year. Up there with the unexplainable enjoyment you feel from watching a perfectly squared up ball race into center field, or from the jitters you get whenever someone utters the name Angel Hernandez. Now this one is another technicality because Rickey was only born in Illinois, but if there was ever a biopic to be made about him, one that's done correctly, they'd have to include his birth somewhere in the film because it took place in a moving Oldsmobile on the way to the hospital in Chicago. Or, in Henderson's own words, I was already fast, I just couldn't wait. I'm not gonna lie, I would have been super disappointed if the best player from Indiana didn't play high school basketball. Of course, not only was Scott Rollman a madman on the diamonds of Jasper High, he owned the courts of the larger DuBois County. Jasper also happens to be the home of the Indiana Baseball Hall of Fame, which is something that not every state has. Like, I understand, maybe Alaska not seeing the need for one, but Georgia not having a Baseball Hall of Fame? Come on. They have a nice website too, with these illustrations of all their inductees, but unfortunately they're compressed to shit. If anybody's been to the Indiana Baseball Hall of Fame, please let me know if they have full sizes of these on display. Some notable inductees include the pitcher you always try to convince your friends was better than he actually was, Jeff Samardzija, the immortal Dave Niehaus, second best player from Indiana and second mentioned in this video, Kenny Lofton, and the only man who stole more bases as a manager than as a player, Lloyd McClendon. all these seemingly disparate men have one thing in common. They're all proud Hoosiers. Roland himself made his name by being Brooks Robinson in the hot corner while being Derek Lee with the bat. While he was more than content with just being inducted in the Indiana Baseball Hall of Fame, Roland wound up getting inducted into the big one in 2023. When I think of the state of Iowa, I think of Field of Dreams and the band Slipknot, two entities that couldn't be further apart on the pop culture spectrum in terms of aesthetics and philosophy. And what better player to capture that internal struggle than Cap Anson, someone who simultaneously brought baseball into the modern age while perpetuating its dark underbelly for decades. He often credited himself as the inventor of the hit and run, while some argued that the greatest player of his generation, also being the most outspoken about his refusal to play with black players, helped solidify the league's prolonged segregation. He was the first player to reach 3,000 career hits. He also blew his contemporaries out of the water with how many bets he placed on baseball, something that wasn't looked down upon during the time, but as we've seen with the Pandora's box that's been opened with legalized betting nowadays, we know where that road would have led to had it remained open. Also of note, his father James founded Cap's hometown by usurping native lands. Cap Anson was colloquially known as Marshalltown's first son because he was the first white boy born there. In fact, if you peruse around the town trying to find an Anson statue, you'll only find one of his father. Now, does being raised in an environment rapidly trying to shed its stolen valor in order to retain Reconstruction-era homogeny have anything to do with fostering Anson's racism? Yes, of course it does. Don't be stupid. Anyone else get disappointed that Kansas misses sharing a border with Iowa by about 50 miles? We could have had 4 states that are both next to each other alphabetically and geographically. Is that just me? Anyway, Johnny Damon is yet another technicality as he was born in an army outpost and grew up in Florida. But he did play for the Kansas City Royals, whose stadium is in the Missouri part of Kansas City. Okay. Kansas is known as the Sunflower State. Sunflowers produce sunflower seeds, one of my favorite foods as a baseball fan with a nut allergy, even though Kansas is only 4th in U.S. sunflower seed production. You want to talk about stolen glory? My God, Kansas, get your shit together. Peter Harold Pee Wee Reese is the best player from the Bluegrass State. Just like with Scott Rowland and Indiana, I would be disappointed if Pee Wee did not ride horses in his youth. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any evidence for it, but there was a racing horse named after him in 2013, so at least we have that. Born in Akron, about 47 miles southeast of Louisville, Pee Wee Reese was another player whose true value wasn't understood at the time, as again, it took him 17 years after appearing on his first ballot to get inducted into the Hall of Fame. Plus, we have to talk character clause here. We can continuously debate what macro impact players have on decisions that are ultimately left up to the powers that be, from Cap Anson to Curt Flood. But there is no denying the impact that 2-time All-Star and World War II veteran Pee Wee Reese had when he wrapped his arm around teammate Jackie Robinson while they were in Cincinnati in 1947. This was only the second city Robinson had played outside of New York in that young season, a foreign and hostile environment to him, but one that was less than 3 hours away from Reese's Akron, Kentucky, forever altering the narrative on white players being able to get along with their black counterparts. Mel Lott was born about 7 miles from New Orleans' French Quarter, an area that has its own mysticism attached to it. Of course, it had to produce its state's best player, someone who possessed his own mysticism. Whether it was him at the age of 9 showing up the teenagers in his neighborhood on the local sandlots, or his high leg kick that seemed to give the 5'9" Ott supernatural power to all fields. The next closest player at his height in homers is Yogi Berra, who hit a whopping 153 homers, also known as Pablo Sandoval's career total less than Ott. By the way, some behind the scenes, while writing this, I've had Google Earth open just to see if there's anything notable about the area surrounding the player's high school, and from what I can tell, the dimensions at his high school field are completely inverse of Polo Grounds, where Ott spent his entire career. The field looks like it was a perfect isosceles triangle, so the power alley is down center, with the lines down right and left field extending into the abyss, completely opposite to the Polo Grounds, with its infamous power alleys down the line less than 300 feet away from home and its center field being 433 feet away, would eventually be moved back to an absurd 483 feet from home plate. I guess Ott was just somebody who took advantage of his surroundings. Unfortunately, Ott died at the age of 49 in an auto accident. He is buried at the Metairie Cemetery in New Orleans, which hosts a bunch of famous cadavers such as Al Copeland, founder of Popeye's Chicken, PBS Pinchback, the first African-American governor of Louisiana, and Andrew Higgins, inventor of the Higgins boat, which you are familiar with if you have ever consumed any ounce of World War II media. Maine hasn't produced a ton of ball players, probably because 75% of its population is just retired fishermen. But we do have George Gore taking the top spot. Because it's Maine, you know I had to see the closest lighthouse to his hometown. That would be the Spring Point Ledge Light in South Portland, and I am not disappointed. That is exactly what I picture when I imagine a Maine lighthouse. Gore himself sported a fantastic mustache while winning 2 World Series with his teammate Roger Connor, you know the one, with the New York Giants in 1888 and 1889. He, just like a lot of people, both past and unfortunately present, suffered from the effects of alcoholism, but was able to live until the ripe old age of 79. Babe Ruth is the greatest player from the state of Maryland. Shocker. Ruth was born in the Pigtown neighborhood of Baltimore. Pigtown got its name from the copious amounts of butchers who were stationed there to serve as intake for all the pigs that were being transported from the Midwest, most of whom were of German descent. So you could say Ruth had that butcher strength. While neither of his parents were butchers, it's safe to say his grandparents were. Ruth was firmly planted in Baltimore growing up, signing with the at the time minor league Orioles club in 1914, playing with them for the rest of the year until the team fell into bankruptcy. Because of his turbulent childhood, it seems like as soon as Ruth got out, he had zero interest in ever returning to the state he had previously never left. Coming back to my own headcanon, I like to believe Ruth's success is a direct result of him imagining having to go back to St. Mary's all-boys school if he didn't play well. Obviously he did, and even in retirement opted to move back to New York and then Florida instead of ever returning to his hometown Baltimore. Jeff Bagwell is the best player from the state of Massachusetts, and as if there is any more reason to laud the Bagwell Astros trade, not only did they fumble a Hall of Famer, that Hall of Famer grew up a Red Sox fan. Now the one consolation is that they did have Mo Vaughn, who was drafted in the first round of '89, while Bagwell was taken in the 4th round. While Mo Vaughn was good and a fan favorite, there is no denying that Bagwell outperformed him offensively and especially defensively, because Mo Vaughn was not good with the glove. I do feel as if the Red Sox need to have a hometown hero in the way they've never gotten one, while it seems like the Yankees receive a new one every year. Tony Conigliaro could have been that guy for them if the baseball, didn't shatter his eye socket. I mean, let's see here. Roman Anthony is from West Palm Beach. You think he has a grandparent or two who moved down from Dorchester? It's definitely worth investigating. We go from what was so close to being a hometown hero situation to a storybook one. Charlie Gehringer was born in the very sparse township of Iosco, about 67 miles west of Detroit, and grew up in the farming village of Handy, which still exists today. Charlie read about Tiger stars like Ty Cobb, Sam Crawford, and Harry Howman while growing up in the area. He played for the University of Michigan Wolverines before being discovered by Tigers outfielder Bobby Veach. He signed a contract with them in 1924. Gehringer was astonished getting the opportunity to play for his childhood hero Ty Cobb. Unfortunately, that astonishment turned into admonishment when Gehringer and Cobb had a falling out over differences in playing philosophies. Once Cobb left the team though, Gehringer's career took off. Now, he was a good hitter in his 20s, but let's just say he had a Bonds-esque tear as he jetted the league into his 30s, culminating in a Tigers World Series win in 1935, a year he really should have won the MVP award. And of course, because he embodied everything Michigan, he helped to create Gehringer & Forsyth, a car manufacturer agency specifically for interior furnishers. Think of how I have an agency that connects me to advertisers such as Factor, but replace me with a third-party manufacturer who specializes in car interiors, and instead of advertisers, we're talking Cadillac and Chevrolet. Gehringer was the ultimate Michigan man until he was replaced in 1999 by M&M. Paul Molitor is the greatest player from the state of Minnesota. That's the only time I'm attempting any accent of any sort here. That was bad. This does beg the question. Does the St. Paul born and raised Molitor have the accent? Of course he does.
So I think that's going to help us reestablish that relationship because, it really wasn't anybody's fault.
Now, just like with George Gore and lighthouses, I have to find out how far the closest lake is to Molitor's high school. About 2.5 miles. God, they're not kidding when they call this place the land of 10,000 lakes. Paul Molitor himself embodied the gritty player who grinded out at-bats and was constantly a threat, despite the fact that his career high in homers starts with a 2. He was just one of 7 players during his career who fit the bill as a power-deft threat. During the end of it, someone named Joe would enroll at Molitor's former high school. This, of course, being Joe Mauer, who ended up adopting the same exact offensive approach as him, being only one of 2 players to fit in the Molitor mold during his playing career. That is some crazy Minnesota energy right there. Also, something Fargo, Hot Dish, and Prince. Again, I love doing this video because I get to learn about guys like Chet Lemon, the best player from the state of Mississippi. Someone who, despite being 17th in our war over the course of his career, only made 3 All-Star teams and never received a single MVP vote. Maybe it's because, just like a lot of guys I've covered, he had an unorthodox tool set. For example, he was really good at getting on base by means of hit by pitch, and played in an era I feel doesn't get the same love and admiration as, say, the golden era 50s or the turn of the century power 90s. Chet the Jet was a crazy good fielder and center, known for his leisurely catches that would occasionally give his coaches heart palpitations, similar to what we see from Trent Grisham nowadays. His defense received national attention in 1984 when his Tigers dominated the baseball world on their way to their 4th and at this point last World Series championship. Unfortunately, Lemon was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder in 1990. Despite putting up a really good season as a 35-year-old right fielder, Lemon's health issues left the Tigers no choice but to waive and eventually release him during spring training the following year. Chet would continue to experience debilitating health issues, which led to a series of strokes that rendered him unable to speak. On a more positive note, he formed the Chet Lemon Baseball School in 1993, whose alumni include players such as fellow Tigers legends Prince Fielder and Kerry Carpenter, Ricky Weeks, Luke Weaver, and Zach Greinke. Similar to Gehringer, Ken Boyer assumed the role of hometown hero for St. Louis Cardinals, being born on the Missouri side of Kansas City, and growing up in the town of Alba with a current population of 544 residents. If you're ever driving down to the Ozarks on I-49 from, say, Omaha, there's a chance you might have stopped at the Boyer Family Service Station. The Boyer brothers might be one of the greatest trios of pros in MLB history. Ken, however, stood atop them all, winning the MVP in 1964 for the Cardinals, who ended their season at the top. The third baseman had a very Adrian Beltre without the longevity-esque career. If you go to Alba, Missouri today, you'll see their local ballpark is named Boyer Field in honor of the silently prestigious baseball family that roamed the fields decades ago. Unfortunately, the newly minted sign sporting the Boyer name was vandalized in 2021, but local officials were quick to clean it up just in time for the start of that year's Summer League. If you're from Montana, please comment. If you've ever been there, please comment. One of my lifelong dreams is to drive an ATV through the winding valleys under the big sky country of this state. I mean, this is a beautiful place. Lewis and Clark were cooking when they traversed this area. Seriously, I can just look at pictures of the state all day. What were we talking about again? Baseball? John Lauenstein? I am sorry, that's not a baseball player. That's a mid-20th century author whose books I had to read in high school. Wait a minute. You're telling me that this man, at the age of 35, more than doubled his career high in homers in 1982 on his way to posting a 176 OPS plus, the 9th highest for a 35-year-old behind Hall of Famers and guys who were juicing. And he looked like this. This man, who had 3 of the top 20 clutchest, I don't even think that's a word by the way, hits during the 1979 postseason before being a key piece of the 1983 World Series Championship Orioles. John Lowenstein from Montana, the one who formed his own apathy club as opposed to a fan club in 1974. Oh, wow. Please check out MLB Hat Billy's video on him for more because, frankly, this guy is my second favorite player now behind Ben Zobrist. And we go from cult hero to, strangely enough, one of the most recognizable figures our sport has produced to this day. Thank you, Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Wade Boggs, just like Johnny Damon's Midwestern roots, don't stem from the cornfields and grain silos, but from the military bases scattered around the flat plains. So Boggs is just as much from the Cornhusker State as Nicole Kidman is from Hawaii. Just like Ricky Henderson, Wade Boggs is a singular force we can point to as to why we love this game so much. Every time I eat chicken, I think about Wade Boggs. Every time I get a drink on an airplane, I think about Wade Boggs. That is how ingrained this man is into my psyche. He was a model of both consistency and just pure domination over his medium. Since his debut in 1982, only Edgar Martinez, Frank Thomas, Juan Soto, and Barry Bonds have put up a higher career on base percentage. Just like Tuco Salamanca and the Cartel found out years later, you just can't beat the Chicken Man. Has anyone ever spent a moment looking at Nevada's population growth chart? That already choked me up, but it burns me even deeper when I look at how it's reflected in the amount of MLB players hailing from the state. For the game's entire history up to the turn of the century, only 10 players called Nevada home. That's over 100 years of baseball, and the best player from the battle-born state was Marty Cordova. In the 21st century alone, that number has grown to 46, one of those players being Bryce Harper, whose meteoric rise as a teenager in the greater Las Vegas area, which eventually culminated in him getting his GED at the age of 16 so he could enroll in the College of Southern Nevada, is something of a local legend. Along with Liberace and Frank Sinatra. Bryce Harper, who in my mind lived up to the billing when he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated at the age of 16, winning MVPs in 2015 and 2021, will be the first Nevada-born player inducted into the Hall of Fame. Also, he's been a vocal critic of the A's move to Las Vegas, which is incredibly based. Live Free or Die is the New Hampshire state motto. It is also the most badass out of all state mottos, no contest. It also serves as the perfect way to describe their best player, Arlie Latham. In fact, his live free or die attitude led to the creation of one of baseball's most sacred rules. You see this guy? That's former Braves third base coach and current Angels manager Ron Washington. As the third base coach, he has to remain in this box while the pitcher goes into his windup. Believe it or not, that wasn't always the case. The reason these lines were drawn and enforced was because of New Hampshire's own Arlie Latham, who, while acting as the third base coach for the New York Giants, would run up and down the third baseline in order to distract the pitcher. Dude is actually one of the most silently influential men in the early days of organized baseball, even becoming an ambassador for the sport in England for 17 years while being the only American who can say he played catch with an actual king. This means Arlie Latham is partially responsible for influencing great baseball Brits such as Phil Stockman and Lance Painter. It's also fitting that the man who came from the state with the most badass nickname had a badass nickname himself. Mike Trout, or the Millville Meteor. By the way, are we still keeping track of that? I think it's 3 players whose nickname has something to do with where they're from, is of course the greatest player from New Jersey. If you are unfamiliar, Mike Trout is the greatest player who debuted in the 21st century. Unfortunately, in a way, he's going to go down as a what-if story, not because he had lost potential early in his career, but because of a cornucopia of injuries he's experienced later into his career. Add on the pandemic-shortened 2020 season, and all of this has downgraded him from a potential inner circle Hall of Famer, we are talking Babe Ruth, Willie Mays levels here, to more of a great player, which is still good. But there are several plateaus that seemed like a lock at first, such as 2,500 hits, 500 homers, 300 stolen bases, that are put into serious jeopardy now. Something I didn't know was that Mike Trout's high school baseball field is right near the Union Lake Dam, confirming that he is in fact a freshwater trout. He also says steak is one of his favorite foods, which sounds innocuous until I found out his high school is down the street from both a Longhorn Steakhouse and a Texas Roadhouse, which begs the question, what was his restaurant of choice after celebrating a victory with his team? These are the hard-hitting questions we have to ask ourselves. Ralph Kiner is yet another player who may have been born in New Mexico, but had no recollection of his time there because in classic New Mexico fashion, his family moved to California when he was a toddler. So let's just talk about Kiner and what was the greatest start to a career in the 20th century. He hit 257 homers in his first 6 seasons, a major league record. Think of all the explosive starts to careers we've seen. Pete Alonso, Aaron Judge, Mark Teixeira, all pale in comparison to Ralph Kiner. He had 329 homers through his age 30 season. Let's say he kept that pace for another 10 years. That would put him at 625 through age 40, which really puts into perspective how impressive the home run record is. But unfortunately, back issues forced Kiner to announce his retirement on September 7th, 1955 at the age of 32. Of course, because it's Ralph Kiner, he smacked homers in back-to-back games at Fenway Park following the announcement. It is not known if he ever spent any time in a hot air balloon, a staple of New Mexico, but I like to believe he paid homage to his birth state by launching baseballs to heights only achievable by the gas-powered giant. Stacked class here. Is the greatest player from New York, teammate of Chet Lemon, and greatest Hall of Fame snub Lou Whitaker? Not quite. Is it Carl Yastrzemski, the greatest player in Red Sox history behind Ted Williams? No. Okay, it has to be Alex Rodriguez, the greatest shortstop in MLB history, whose talent would have been looked at as a work of fiction for most fans who were unable to see it for themselves. Boy, you're getting so close. Is it some old guy who retired before any of these guys were born? Of course. Eddie Cocky Collins is the best player from the state of New York. And he's not even from New York City. He's from the town of Millerton, not even a mile from the New York-Connecticut border. A town with a, and I'm not making this up here, current population of 903 people. It is pretty much the platonic ideal of a small town. This place literally looks like a postcard. While he wasn't born in the Big Apple, he certainly attended school there, going to Columbia University. Not only was going to school a rarity for ball players at the time, going to an Ivy League school even to this day is exceptionally rare. In my mind, Collins is the overlooked early 20th century superstar. Everyone remembers Ruth, Gehrig, Wagner, Cobb, Cy Young, and even Rogers Hornsby. But I don't see my boy Eddie Collins getting the same love. And I think it's because there's no long-lasting cultural touchstone attached to his name. Ruth had the home run record. Lou Gehrig had the consecutive games record, and unfortunately for a time the disease was unofficially named after him, which is being phased out, which I am so glad for.
I'll call it Lou Gehrig's disease. I just have to remember to make sure this cap is screwed on tight. Well, I guess the joke's on me.
Wagner had T206, Cobb had the embattled public image, Cy Young has the award, and Hornsby had the 1986 hit The Way It Is. Collins was just an all-around excellent player whose performance spoke for itself. Before there was A-Rod, there was Luke Appling, the true shortstop of nobility. Him, Archie Vaughn, and Vern Stevens, who I will one day make a video on, were the original poster boy shortstops. Unfortunately, we Americans were quite prudish back then, and so no cover story featuring a group shirtless pic of these guys existed. But only one of those players could lay claim as the greatest from his home state, and that is Luke Appling. As we've seen with plenty of other players, however, his family moved to Atlanta before Luke even knew his own name. But the purpose of this video is to celebrate great players of yesteryear as much as it is about celebrating where they hail from. Luke Appling was known as a hypochondriac. Every day, another ailment. Whether it was an achy back, sore wrist, or a wonky hammy. It was probably because he grinded at bats like no one else. Over the course of MLB history, only 2 other players collected over 1,300 free passes while holding onto his bat after an unproductive plate appearance less than 600 times. The others being our old friend Eddie Collins and Tris Speaker, who we will eventually get to. He was also a man of the people. One story goes that he asked White Sox ownership for balls that he could autograph for friends. They refused, citing the cost of balls being too high to be wasted on autographs. So, in his next game, Appling fouls off 10 straight pitches, looks up at the owner's box and says, "That's $27.50, and I'm just getting started." Also, yeah, he died in Cumming, Georgia. Get your laughs out. It's actually quite a lovely place. One time, my old best friend and I tried writing a song because we both had crushes on girls from the area. You could probably guess what it was called. Darren Erstad is the best player from the state of North Dakota. I have to be honest, everything I attribute to North Dakota is actually only true about South Dakota. Erstad was born in Jamestown, which was named after Jamestown, Virginia, which was named after King James I, making the name of this town a copy of a copy. It served as a hub and repair yard for trains on the Northern Pacific Railroad Transcontinental Line, making the trek over the nearby James River. It is, like many places covered here, a quaint town. Erstad, who went to high school in Jamestown and went to college in Lincoln, Nebraska, must have experienced quite the culture shock when he was drafted by the California Angels. This didn't seem to affect him as he made his MLB debut a year after getting drafted. I guess even the Angels of previous ownership were just as aggressive in calling their young players up. Just like so many before him, he went from being a first baseman / corner outfielder to a Gold Glove winning center fielder. And something of a one-year wonder when he put up an eye-watering 8.4 wins above replacement in 2000. One of my favorite Darren Erstad fun facts is that he has the most hits in a single season for someone not named Ichiro Suzuki in the 21st century. So yeah, next time you need to impress your friends, just let them know that the American with the most hits in a single season during the 21st century is from Jamestown, North Dakota. Oh, Mike Schmidt's from Ohio? Oh, hell no. Mike Schmidt went to the University of Ohio? Oh, hell no. Mike's parents operated a locally beloved Jack's Drive-In and an aquatic center in Ohio? Oh, hell no. Okay, being serious for a second, I like Ohio a lot and personally think it gets too bad a rap. One aspect that receives little validation from outsiders are their beautiful rivers, with the aptly named Ohio River drawing the state's entire southern border. Another one of these rivers forms the eastern boundary to Ohio's 6th most populous city, Dayton, home to its best player, Mike Schmidt. Schmidt was heavily scouted by Tony Lucadelo of the Phillies, who played a state away. Side note, I always forget Ohio and Pennsylvania share a border. The fact that Ohio is 3 times closer to New York than Georgia is to Mississippi never sits right with me, but it's true. After graduating from Ohio University with one of the state's best college careers, Schmidt would be drafted by the Phillies with the 30th overall pick in the 1971 draft. Schmidt struggled in AA, but found himself in AAA the next year. Despite the fact that his first full season was in 1973, Schmidt would go on to put the 7th most reference wins above replacement over the course of the 70s. Not content with that, he started the decade with a World Series championship, a series in which he took home MVP honors, on his way to putting up the 3rd most wins above replacement in the 80s, even though he only played in 150 games over the decade's final 2 seasons. Mike Schmidt embodies Ohio's unique versatility by being a mighty 4-tool player, even if I'm being a bit nice on the speed component. He's the only third baseman in MLB history who has hit over 500 homers, stolen over 100 bases, and put up over 100 fielding runs. And even though he's a Phillies legend, he's an even bigger Dayton legend. 4. Make it 4 players whose nickname is derived from their place of origin. Part of baseball's charm is its parallels, one of which being the parallel between the Commerce Comet and the Millville Meteor. Both center fielders who, despite being in the conversation for greatest of all time, could have been even better. Mantle's namesake town, Commerce, came into existence originally as a Native American resettlement who were then resettled after the area was found to have zinc and lead deposits. These deposits attracted Charles Mutt Mantle shortly after his son Mickey was born. What can I say? The men yearn for the mines. Mickey was predestined to become a ball player, with his father even naming him after Hall of Famer Mickey Cockring, even though it was merely a nickname, because, like, seriously, who names their kid Mickey? Especially in a post-Disney world. Similar to Willie Mays, Mantle played with some of the older men in the minors league as a teenager. That's, again, minors league, because they were mining. Legend has it, scouts came down to evaluate Mantle's teammate, but were awestruck when they saw this 16-year-old Mantle hit 2 homers that landed in a nearby creek well. Now, I did find a diamond with a creek well behind it that lies within Commerce, Mickey Mantle Field itself. If this is the one they were at, then oh boy, I do not think this 16-year-old Mantle is reaching this creek well that is 451 feet away from home plate. Remember, he is playing with a wooden bat and is 16 years old. Luckily, this would be the last time any of Mantle's homer distances would be blown out of proportion ever again. Mantle famously could have stolen over 500 bags had he not hit an exposed drainage pipe tracking down a Willie Mays flyout as a rookie during the 1951 World Series, tearing his ACL. Not so fun fact, his dad was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease the same day after he collapsed trying to get his son to the hospital. Mickey would recover to have a cartoonishly good career, beating out the Waterbury Waxen winner Roger Connor for greatest switch hitter of all time. Unfortunately, another injury while trying to field a fly ball from the Little Rock Libration Brooks Robinson disrupted what many regard as the greatest prime in MLB history. And by the age of 33, Mantle had seen the best of his career come to pass. Mantle's life is notoriously filled with tragedy, and I recommend seeking out more information on it after this video. I mentioned a second ago that Mike Schmidt was the third greatest player of the 80s, despite not putting up full seasons in 88 and 89. Well, do you know who the greatest player of the 1980s is? It's Rickey Henderson. Of course it is. But do you know who the second greatest player is? It's Wade Boggs. But the 10th greatest player of the 80s was Dale Murphy, who happens to also be the greatest player from the great state of Oregon. Hailing from the city of Portland, one of those cities your family was talking a lot about over Thanksgiving dinner, despite never being there. Murphy's ties to his home state were almost washed away by a family move to Northern California, but they got some sense and moved back to Portland. He became a standout catcher at his high school that was named after famous non-Oregonite Woodrow Wilson. The Braves took notice and drafted him 5th overall. From there, he became yet another versatile star of the 80s, even though he's become one of the biggest discrepancy cases between nerds and vibes enjoyers in the field when he won 5 straight gold gloves from 82 to 86, even though he accrued negative 46 fielding runs and had 4.6 defensive wins below replacement. One of the biggest tragedies in Murphy's career was that he never won a playoff game. As a member of the hapless Braves of the 80s, he was traded right before their miracle 1991 run. Even more cruel, he was cut by the Phillies right before their miracle 1993 run. Such a great player and never got to experience the simple thrill of winning a playoff game. Might be one of the best to never experience that. So I say the Braves right their wrong by signing Murphy to a one-day contract on his 69th birthday, and let him suit up for the Braves as a base running advisor in the NLDS so he can say he won a game as a member of the 2025 Braves. As I continue to make my way through these states, patterns start to form. As someone who categorizes everything to a fault, I start to throw these guys into buckets. My third favorite being somebody who embodies literally every waking aspect of their birthplace. Honus Wagner was born in what is now Carnegie, Pennsylvania, named after, yes, famed Scottish/Pennsylvanian steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, the same one whose U.S. Steel Company would own the same town in which Willie Mays was born in. Honus worked in one of the many coal mines just outside of Pittsburgh. What can I say? The children yearn to work in the mines. While he was of what you could only kindly say was an awkward build, the years spent breaking dense composite with a pickaxe gave Honus a strong frame. He displayed an uncanny reaction time which would have made him a model fielder for any infield position, so naturally he chose shortstop. He started his career with the Louisville Colonels, but after the contraction from the league, Wagner found himself back home in Pittsburgh, where he became the greatest player of the 1900s. His ghostly presence, blazing speed, and German heritage earned him the nickname the Flying Dutchman, an actual top 10 nickname in MLB history. Just to put into perspective how dominant a player he was, when the Baseball Hall of Fame cast its first vote in 1936, he was tied with Babe Ruth for second in voting, behind only Ty Cobb. He is 5th all-time with 10 7+ WAR seasons. That is more than Brooks Robinson, Chipper Jones, and Carl Yastrzemski combined. I know I have my thoughts on pre-integration ball and the talent gap that existed, but that is still very impressive. I love Rhode Island because it has to have the greatest shoreline divided by total area. So naturally, its best player, Nap Lajoie, was born just about as far away from the Rhode Island coast as you can get in Woonsocket. His family were French Canadians who migrated to America around the time Quebec started to stabilize politically. I guess his family saw the American Civil War just ended and thought to themselves, yeah, that looks like a good country to reside in. It turns out their risky move paid off as Rhode Island quickly became one of the most prosperous post-war states during their Gilded Age. Unfortunately, hard times fell on the Lajoie family as their patriarch John Baptiste died in 1881. This forced even the youngest of their siblings, Knapp, to find work, eventually becoming a janitor for a textile mill. While in Woonsocket, young Knapp discovered a local baseball team that fueled his interest in the sport. From there, he became another turn-of-the-century masher. He was considered to be a power hitter for his time when he led the American League with an, at the time, astounding 14 homers in 1901, the same amount that Michael Massey hit in 2024. Knapp really made his mark when he joined the Cleveland Blues, who became considerably less blue when adding Lajoie, so they decided to change their name in honor of their shiny new acquisition. Even though they were still a middling team for their time, at least Lajoie gave the fans something to cheer about. Knapp is another player who, while being among the greatest of his time, gets lost in the shuffle for most modern fans. Part of this is because he played for a bunch of mediocre teams, never participating in a postseason game, and just like Eddie Collins, doesn't have that one distinctive memento for fans to latch onto. Besides the fact that a team named themselves after him, I don't know, I think that's kind of cool. He was just a great player who exceeded at everything. Beautiful South Carolina. Known for having the best state flag, and don't even try to argue with me because you know I'm right, beautiful beaches, and of course Willie Randolph. This one certainly surprised me. Think of the states in the Southeast Appalachian region. Georgia has Ty Cobb, North Carolina has Luke Appling, nearby Tennessee, we'll get to in a second, but trust me, he's very good. And then you have South Carolina, whose best player sticks out as a few tiers below the guys I just mentioned. That isn't to say Willie Randolph isn't a legend, he is, but for a state that's in the center of a region who's a hotbed for all-generation talent, it's peculiar that their best player is merely great, and not an immortal. Now there is one caveat, and that is Shoeless Joe Jackson poking right beneath him, whose career was cut short right after a platform season at the age of 32 due to the fallout of the Black Sox scandal. So take that for what you will. Unfortunately, Randolph didn't even grow up in South Carolina. He grew up in Brooklyn, where he became synonymous with the Yankees as a player and eventually the Mets as a manager. The Dakota with all the cool stuff in it. Mainly Mount Rushmore, the Revenant, Badlands, and the slightly better player. Mark Ellis was born in the state's second most populated area, Rapid City, a city that encapsulates everything badass about South Dakota, whether it's the Black Hills that look down upon the Piedmont, the dinosaur sculptures that patrol those hills, or the fact it's the midpoint between Mount Rushmore, the Badlands, and the town of Deadwood, the setting of the HBO television series of the same name. Ellis marks my second favorite category, the Better Than You Remember camp. He was the primary second baseman for the 2006 Athletics, the now final team in Oakland to make it past the division series. Saying that really fucking hurts, by the way. Fuck you, John Fisher. He was also the primary second baseman for the Dodgers team that started their incredible run in 2013. His career was pretty much we have Ian Kinsler at home, but as we've seen, Ian Kinsler at home is still pretty freaking good. Mookie Betts is the only 10 I see, as in 10 out of 10 player from the state of Tennessee. No offense to Chase Headley's hero. Mookie was born and went to high school in the country music capital of the world, Nashville, Tennessee. He attended the same high school as Hank Williams Jr., son of the original sad boy Hank Williams. Mookie's size is and always has been a point of discussion. Little League coaches refused to play him because of it, his draft stock lowered. But Mookie's talent far exceeded the crude matter that it was packaged in. Betts is everything I love about baseball, not letting physical limitations dictate your ability, going all out on every play, the energy he brings whether it be with the glove, bat, or his legs. I also irrationally blame him and his charisma for the reason we are inundated with in-game interviews on national broadcast. Many of us don't remember, but Mookie was one of the first players to be interviewed during a spring training game in 2018, and dropped the famous "I ain't getting this one, boys," creating a mini viral moment. Had they interviewed someone with less charisma, maybe we aren't getting Enrique Hernandez or Jeremy Pena botching plays while dealing with broadcasting nightmares such as loose in-ears or Carl Ravitch. Bold prediction time, I believe Mookie Betts beats Mike Trout in career reference war. Fitting that the best player from Texas has the name Tris Speaker. Now, I already know a lot about the hitting Triscuit, but removing the association to the man, Tris Speaker is such a classic Texas name, you'd think he released a song called Trailer Anthem in 1973 that peaked at number 47 on the Hot Country charts before fading into obscurity and opening a barbecue restaurant in Texarkana. Of course, that is just a deluge in the never-ending stream of useless thoughts that I call my conscience. The real Tris Speaker was born in Hubbard, Texas, shortly before its population boomed as a result of finding mineral water deposits in the surrounding area. Unfortunately, after an F4 tornado destroyed the town in 1973, the only thing it is now known for is being the home of Tris Speaker. He even takes up 20% of their welcome sign. Even Commerce's welcome sign includes Mickey Mantle's name more as a footnote than the main attraction. Tris was Texas. He was a bull rider, expert with the rope. Basically, he wouldn't have looked that out of place as a farmhand on McFarland Ranch. Even though he was born right-handed, Tris had to teach himself how to throw and bat lefty, because he broke his right arm twice after being flung off a Bronco. He was a brilliant center fielder and served as the Texas foil to Ty Cobb's Georgia Peach. In 1923, he put up one of the most bizarre seasons for a 35-year-old. Yes, even more bizarre than John Lowenstein's, when he hit 59 doubles and drove in 130 runs while scoring 130 runs himself. The only other player who accomplished this in the 20th century or later was Babe Ruth, who did it twice. In fact, driving in 130 runs and scoring 130 more has only been done 9 times this century, and Tris Speaker did it at the age of 35. Also, Tris's inclusion marks every player that I featured in the 1910 batting title video being the best player from their respective state. If you haven't seen it yet, please consider watching. I gave it a rewatch recently, and I genuinely think it is my most slept on work to date. And my favorite category, the who the fuck is that one? First question about Duke Sims, the greatest player from Utah. Is he Mormon? Couldn't find any sources verifying it, so there's a 50-50 shot. He did attend high school in Idaho, so his ties to Utah don't go that deep, unfortunately. He debuted with the Indians in 1964 as a backup catcher, and it'd take 3 years before he became their primary, completing a secret positional dynasty as Cleveland catchers racked up the 3rd most F-WAR during the decade. Despite the good play, Sims was bumped off the position by his roommate Ray Fosse in 1970, where he became the rare super utility player whose only time in the infield was exclusively spent at catcher and first base, the last player to do that being Blake Swihart in 2019. He was traded to the Dodgers that offseason, where he returned to being a backup catcher who could occasionally pick up innings in the outfield. He also hit the final homer in the old Yankee Stadium before it was completely renovated in 1974. And that's who the fuck Duke Sims is. Man, if I was a New Hampshireite watching this video, I'd be pissed. Carlton Fisk was born in Vermont, yes, but only because the nearest hospital to his family's New Hampshire hometown was across the Connecticut River. Fisk even asked the Red Sox to remove his plaque from their Hall of Fame because it misleadingly characterized him as a Vermont native. Arlie Latham is cool though. Really, I feel more bad for Vermonters who don't get to call Larry Gardner the best player whose birth certificate has a VT on it, as he bled the Green Mountain State through and through. Still, Carlton Fisk is by all accounts from Vermont, even if he wants to rid himself of that distinction. I mean, you can see the damn state from his hometown. Fisk was one of those poster boys along with Johnny Bench and Thurman Munson for the greatest era of catchers. Seriously, what was in the water around this time? From 1901 to 1979, the top 10 seasons for catcher WAR were all in the 70s, and even to this day, 3 of those seasons remain there. What I forget about is the fact that Carlton's peak wasn't that outstanding. It was good, but I'd argue catchers like Buster Posey and Joe Mauer had way better. What really separated Fisk was his longevity. He was catching games into his mid-40s. Sure, he wasn't that good by the end of it, but he nearly put up a 5-WAR season as a 42-year-old in 1990. He really was the Nolan Ryan of catchers, debuting the same year that we landed on the moon and playing his last game about a month before Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream released. He was also called a prima donna by Jerry Reinsdorf. Very based. I'm gonna be honest for a second. Virginia is a state that I used to despise, whether it was the fact that it had the longest distance north to south of any state on the East Coast, which made it a slog to get through during family road trips to New England, or the fact that I had a bad experience once during a work trip to Richmond, in which my Uber driver almost got in a car wreck on the stretch of highway between Virginia Tech and Charlottesville, home to some of the most horrific American events in the 21st century. However, while on tour, several experiences have given me an appreciation for the Old Dominion, one of which is driving along the Chesapeake Bay, whose largest city is the origin of the state's greatest player, David Wright. Norfolk is a bayfront city home to the Chrysler Museum of Art, Virginia Port Authority, and the Norfolk Tide, the former AAA affiliate of the Mets who helped build young David Wright's interest in the sport. Because his dad was a police officer, the Wright family lived in close proximity to the station, which also happened to be a 10-minute walk from Harbor Park. Watching guys like Steve Springer and Alex Ochoa inspired the gifted third baseman to pursue baseball further, and as fate would have it, the same team that inspired him wrote his checks for the entirety of Wright's career. Unfortunately, a debilitating back condition stopped what would have been a Hall of Fame career right in its tracks. If you want to learn more about David and the Mets after his injury, please check out Replacing Wright if you haven't watched it already. From Washington's home to Washington State. Strangely, Ron Santo is similar to David Wright in many ways, both third basemen, both on-base machines, and both grew up a nearby minor league stadium that would help carve out their interest in playing. Santo grew up around Sick's Stadium in the city of Seattle. You know the one. One piece of information that you could only get from me as Mr. Music/baseball nerd is that the site of Old Sick's Stadium is only about a 12-minute drive from Kurt Cobain's house. You know the one, as both are on the east side of the city. Ron Santo pretty much was what David Wright would become if David Wright was slow, but Santo was unique in the fact that he became the first player to be open about having type 1 diabetes, which he became an advocate for. This helped pave the way for players such as Sam Fuld, Mason Miller, and Garrett Mitchell, who wouldn't have gotten a second look if it wasn't for Ron Santo proving that diabetes couldn't hold a good player back. He is one of the most beloved players in Cubs history, and it genuinely pains me that he died 6 years before he would have seen their first World Series ring during his lifetime. George Brett should be proud to know that in addition to being the funniest player of all time,
when I take a drink of my coffee, we're both sitting at the restaurant having a cup of coffee. So let's take a drink of our coffee now. Now you say, boy, George, this coffee tastes like mud.
Boy, George, this coffee tastes like mud.
It should. It was fresh ground this morning.
He's also the best from his home state of West Virginia. Brett was born in the town of Glendale, not Glendale, Glendale, like it's a first and last name, home of fellow misplaced comedian Brad Paisley. Unfortunately, as many of you know, his family moved to where else? California. So give my carnations to Jesse Burkett, and no, I'm not making this name up, Jack Glasscock, as the best true West Virginians. George's parents went 4 for 4 on making good ball players, as every single Brett child ended up getting time on a professional baseball team. But only George and Ken would clock in on a major league field. George became one of the greatest gap-to-gap hitters in MLB history, taking advantage of Kauffman Stadium's deep alleys in order to become one of the few players post-integration who seriously challenged Tris Speaker's all-time doubles record. And of course, no George Brett segment is complete without mentioning the Bellagio incident.
To the left side. I shit my pants last night.
The best player from Wisconsin, Al Simmons, who spent his prime with the Philadelphia Athletics before getting tossed around 7 different franchises for the last 9 years of his career, might go down as one of the most criminally overlooked players when it comes to single-season accomplishments. We always talk about Ted Williams being the last guy to ever hit 400 in a single season, which overshadows the fact that Al Simmons was the last guy to hit 390 in a season before him. We talk about Ichiro, breaking George Sisler's single-season hit record of 257 in 2004 when he got on base 262 times via the base hit. But we never talk about the fact that Al Simmons was 4 hits away from tying it in a year where his team had to cancel 3 games due to weather. We talk about the RBI prowess from guys of his time like Greenberg and Fox, but lost in that conversation is that Simmons is right up there with them as one of only 5 players to post 3 or more 150 plus RBI seasons. Simmons was really good, and I feel kind of bad momentarily confusing him with Ted Simmons, even though Al's real last name is Szymanski. But I guess mispronunciations aren't something unique to me, and nobody on his team could pronounce his name. So he looked up, saw an advertisement for Simmons Hardware Company, and was like, "You can call me Al." Simmons. Also beer, cheese, and bratwurst. And we round things off with good old Brandon Nimmo, from Cheyenne, Wyoming. Because of the fact that Wyoming, along with South Dakota and Montana, doesn't have officially sanctioned high school baseball leagues, Brandon had to opt automatically for out-of-state travel ball, which meant a lot of traveling. Luckily, he made it worth his parents' while by being really freaking good at baseball. And miraculously, and just for housekeeping's sake, I mean this in the sense that a teenager from Wyoming got drafted, don't want to imply Brandon didn't earn it because he did. Anyway, miraculously, Brandon was drafted 13th overall by the Mets out of high school, where he would achieve every Wyomingite's dream: getting out. Again, I kid. Wyoming is a lovely state. Y'all literally have Yellowstone. I'm just jealous because my forlorn state doesn't have a single national park. Brandon Nimmo is one of those guys who you look at the back of his baseball card and feel relatively unmoved at first. But then you start to really dig in deep and appreciate what a hell of a player he is. For example, he has a better on-base percentage since 2018 than Shohei Ohtani, Alex Bregman, and Jose Altuve. He's third among center fielders with a 128 OPS plus since that time. The two ahead of him are Julio Rodriguez and Mike Trout. Then you realize that baseball shouldn't have been in the cards for him based purely on where he's from. We will probably never see a player this good from Wyoming again, so appreciate Brandon Nimmo while you're able to. Man, you know that feeling of exhaustion you get after getting back from a long trip? I hope you enjoyed going on that journey. Did any player surprise you? Do you feel joy having learned about guys like Arlie Latham or John Lowenstein? Are you slightly disappointed your state's best player didn't rank as high as you thought they would? Are you currently watching this video from Riverside, California? I would love to know. As always, subscribe, like the video, and tell a friend. Thank you to Factor for sponsoring. Remember, use code NMFNOV50 to get 50% off and free shipping on your first Factor box. Not only is this a great deal, doing so would really help out the channel. If you made it this far, as promised, I actually decided to make a playlist by looking up every state on Spotify and adding the top song. And then I ranked them like so. Playlist is linked in the description. Let me know if you have any disagreements. Anyway, have a good holiday season, and I will see you in a couple weeks.